Welcome to another CHRO Conversation from the Center for Executive Succession at the Darla Moore School of Business. I'm your host, Anthony Nyberg. Today I'm joined by Ola Snow, Chief Human Resources Officer at Cardinal Health. Ola leads Cardinal's human resources, diversity, equity and inclusion, community relations, communications, environmental health and safety, security, real estate and facilities organizations, guiding about 50,000 employees across 30 countries. Ola, thank you very much for coming back down here. We always love having you on campus, and the students really appreciate getting a really honest opinion from you and on so many topics.
Well, I love being here. You know that. I always learn something, and coming to campus always means that you're going to hear great questions from your students. They're going to have done research on your organization, research on you, and you might even learn something about yourself through the process, which I did today.
Yeah, so let's talk about that. So one of the questions asked of you, and I think it comes from the place where we talk about CHROs needing to have courage to really lead and tell the truth and drive organizational success that way. But at the same time, I know you've worked on the importance of leaders showing their vulnerability to help employees understand what's really going on.
Sure.
How do you balance those two things that seem like they're at opposite ends?
It's a question I got today, and one that I probably never pondered, but as I thought about it, it was probably an easy thing to do. And I think leaders have to be their authentic self. For me, I feel like a little bit of my superpower is being vulnerable. And I'm okay with that. I always say that my family or my stories are always family approved. So I don't share anything that my family's not comfortable with. But as CHROs, we do have to be fearless and sometimes ruthless about the decisions that we make. And I balance that with really thinking about and understanding what's best for the organization, and that means what's best overall for 50,000 plus employees in our organization. And that may mean that you have to make hard decisions about divestitures, around who joins your organizations, around reductions in forces, and all the economic things that are going on. But making sure that you're leading with that vulnerability, with that empathy. And for me, it's around sharing the why behind those decisions. We've all had to make decisions and make choices around culture over these last few months, but making our organization understand of what is changing and what is not changing and why are we making those decisions, and being vulnerable to say, I have the best interest of the entire organization in hand, is how I kind of balance those two things. Sometimes that means that people know that I struggle with some of the decisions that we make, but I'm making them from a place that I believe is good for the organization. And what I mean by that is good for the overall population of our organization.
And somewhat relatedly, you're well known for being a strong advocate for the role of thinking about mental health in organizations, and that it can be ultimately cost effective as well as obviously the right thing to do for employees. In this day and age where there's so much trauma in the world and employees facing challenges and really fear about what the future might lead.
Sure.
How do you balance the idea of helping employees think about their own mental health?
Well, first of all, I think that I somewhat take my own personal family situations or friend situations or colleague situations, and I understand kind of what that feels like. And, you know, I've been honest to say that during COVID, I struggled to sleep. And I shared that with the organization around all of the decisions that we were having to make on a weekly, daily, even hourly basis. Our journey started a little bit before that COVID emphasis on mental health, and that was I lost a personal friend and a colleague and a leader in our organization to suicide. And that made me step back and really study our data. We were in the middle of a mental health crisis, and my vendors were telling me I was no different than any other organization, and that wasn't good enough for me. So it's important to put programs in place to support the mental health efforts, training in place, and we do all of those things and do, I think, leading the way. But that none of that is going to matter if you don't change the stigma of talking about your mental health, change the culture that it's okay and safe to be psychologically safe and talk about your mental health. And as I said, I talked a little bit about my own anxiety during COVID and the stress and the weight of that and how it felt to me, and both the physical and mental challenges that I went through during that time. I find that as CHROs and as a function, if we can meet people where they are and get them the help that they need, that it just produces a great culture and it produces better business results. So our journey around mental health has been around programs, but again, around making sure that we're connecting inside and outside in our communities. We train healthcare professionals on stress management. We know what that did to clinicians out of the pandemic, and we also make sure that we're connecting with community leaders to make sure that we're talking about why we believe mental health. Our mental health story is a good one when it looks like data. So first and foremost, our high cost claims have drastically decreased in the last 5 years. Our mental health spend is the same, but we're helping more people in the right point of care where they can get preventative care, not just maybe inpatient care or a hospitalization. So our EAP, everyone has an EAP, but we're utilizing that EAP differently and making sure that people know that they have an opportunity to connect as well. And we're doing that within our community. Our CEO talks to other CEOs about the importance of mental health. So I don't say that we've just doubled down, but we've tripled down, and we're seeing our well-being engagement scores go up. We know that this generation of college students want a place to go where they can talk about their mental health. So this is a workforce strategy for us. It's a well-being strategy for us. It's also a workplace violence strategy for us, Anthony. If we can help people who are in a mental health crisis, we see one too many times that ex-employees come back and hurt their colleagues or their ex-colleagues. And so it is all of those things of why we believe it's the smart thing to do and the right thing to do, and the safe thing to do for our customers, our communities, and importantly, our employees.
And so you're finding that even the fact that this is the right thing to do, it also makes good business sense?
Makes good business sense. It sounds easy, but we believe that if we can create a culture where people can thrive, they will bring their best, they will do their best, and we will produce better business results. And part of that is well-being, and part of that is mental health. So it all is combined together around creating a world-class culture.
And now at CES, we of course are talking about the importance of CEO succession. Can you say a little bit about what the role of the CHRO is in CEO succession?
It's a great point, and we follow a CES playbook to a T, right? We work with our board of directors on CEO succession on a yearly. I talk on a quarterly basis with our comp committee around CEO development, succession, and all of that. So I think it's first and foremost following that playbook. And I think the CHRO has an important role before, during, and even after CEO succession. So it's making sure that you're developing that role profile for today and for the future, and making sure that your board of directors understands that. And not just identifying internal candidates, but where are the companies that you might go to look at possible feeder jobs or even CEO candidates in that as well. Having an honest discussion with your CEO, making sure that CEO succession is on their top of their mind, and making sure that they are having conversations with the board along the way as well. Obviously, development is a huge part of that as well, as you start to identify candidates both internally to understand what is the role, what are the capabilities that you need, but also what are the jobs and experiences and all of that goes into being a CEO. So I think the CHRO has an important role with the CEO, with the board of directors, but also with those candidates as we think about in identifying internal candidates as well, so that you can have a seamless transition from one CEO to the other. So they have an incredibly important role.
Terrific. Now, I know you were kind of kidding about, don't ask me more about AI. That's all people want to talk about. But I need to ask you.
Okay.
So what are some things that you think all organizations probably should be doing right now in terms of AI, or at least HR roles in organizations?
Yeah, I think, you can't pick up a book, listen to a podcast or anything else without talking about AI. And I think HR has an important role alongside your technology organization of thinking about AI and what is not just the tools that we need to use together, but then again, how is that going to change your workforce? And how do you think about reskilling an organization and partnering with an organization? Do you want AI to kind of lead so that you can use it more in a business sense, generating revenue, or is it also an efficiency play for you as well? Obviously, you need a governance structure of where are you going to play and where aren't you going to play, and how are you going to use those tools and what are you going to do? And that is a partnership, again, with your board of directors, managing risk with your senior leadership team, and in many cases, your CIO or your technology CTO is kind of leading the way. So you need that partnership. I think from, again, a macro standpoint with the organization, HR has to lead with change management, and I think it's been underutilized or underappreciated, the amount of change that's happening, fear, all of that. So making sure that you're clear and transparent about what is AI going to do with your organization and what is it not going to do, taking kind of the mystery and the fear out of what is your AI strategy. From a functional standpoint, we've looked at AI, and we really started, and I think every CHRO should first of all start with understanding what is your vendors, what are their capabilities, what are you underutilizing with some of your vendors, because you may go out and think about purchasing or doing something on your own when your vendors can actually do that alongside of you. And we do that with our vendors and really kind of uncover some of those things. I think it's also partnering to understand we're doing an exercise in our organization, understanding where can AI benefit our organization and become more effective. Now, we believe humans need to make decisions in our organization, and I'll never think of an AI business partner. That's not the direction that we're going. But where can we be more efficient? Where can we use AI in analytics and data to bolster the organization, to bring insights and data to our organization around our human capital or our human capital strategy? How are we more efficient? So and we've got some really great things going on. We're using an AI tool to help train a new workforce in one of our businesses, and instead of you and I role playing on a customer representative call, you're doing that with an AI agent, and then gives you kind of a scorecard of how you did. And so those
it's probably also a little less intimidating to practice on your own.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I feel less intimidated. I can be myself, and then for me, I get this little bit of a report card to tell me you did this really great, but here's an opportunity where you could do things better. So we're trying to take the mystery and the fear maybe out of it and utilizing it to be, again, where employees can be more efficient, more effective, sooner. And these are new employees that are coming to our organization because this is a new business for us. So we want people to see it as a win and not necessarily as something kind of scary out there.
So when you talk about removing some of that fear, where does transparency play in that? And what does transparency mean when we think about the role that AI is going to play in people's jobs?
Yeah, I think that we are trying to study and understand where can we be more efficient, where can AI really impact our organizations. I don't think for us, quite frankly, that I see right now that AI is going to take out complete roles. Could it mean that we go from 20 heads to 15 heads? Possibly, right? But again, we want to utilize people to be able to do really strategic work and work, not all of that kind of administrative work that I think can make us all so efficient. I have to admit, this was the first year that we allowed maybe the wrong word, but I used AI to help me write performance reviews. As a CHRO, it's probably the thing I like to do the least. I do quarterly meetings with my employees, so I feel like it's just, we've talked about this 4 times or 3 times, and so it was great to use that as a tool. And honestly, what probably would take me 12 hours took me a couple of hours. Now I didn't just spit everything into a tool and run with it. I certainly had to edit, take my thoughts, but it was a good, and I talked about that in our organization on, hey, those are 8 hours that I could spend with a business leaders doing something far more impactful than just sitting there writing. I think the beauty of performance reviews is in the conversations that you and I have and the conversations about your career, not necessarily what's written on the paper, but it was a way for us to kind of get ahead. So we talk about those things, and we talk about the transparency of what it is and what it won't be. We're early in this game as well. I think for us, maybe we're a little behind catching up, but I do think that our organization is really talking about how do we impact our efficiency of our customers, better customer service, and our functions are important as well as we kind of drive efficiency in each of those functions.
Are there places that you would point to, whether in your own organization or that you've seen elsewhere, that you would say, this is probably a place we should pause a little bit and not keep experimenting in great deal?
I think we have to think about bias in AI, and I think there's been a lot of noise around talent acquisition. So I think it's an area where we need to have a lot of scrutiny and better understand, because again, that's a lot of partnership when you think about. So is there things that would have bias or bring risk to your organization that you might say, hey, let's think about pausing in that arena. But anything that I think could lead to organizational risk, we keep a particular eye on as well. We use AI a lot in cybersecurity, but again, it's what are humans doing and what is AI doing, and introducing risk to the organization. So just understanding and making sure that you go slow to go fast, that you're not introducing additional risk to the organization.
And now switching again back to related to succession probably.
Yep.
What is the CHRO's role, and what's the most effective way for dealing with the board of directors? How do you go about creating that trust, and where do you see the CHRO's role really being in dealing with them?
It's a fantastic question, and I think one that can be somewhat of a black box as CHROs step into roles is your relationship with your board of directors is different than your relationship with your management team or even your CEO. We have the same foundational principles in place of being transparent with our board. And as the CHRO, that's an interesting place to be in, because you're going to get asked a lot of questions about the culture, about what's happening in the business, and you're also going to get a lot of questions about the management team, which you have to be, again, I see that role as being truth tellers, and being an unbiased person as you're looking into the business, because again, their role is oversight and managing risk and making sure that you are forging ahead with that relationship. I think the relationship with your chairman of the board, whether they're independent or not, is very important. And I think the relationship with whatever your compensation or HR committee and compensation in our world is really important. I think the CHRO role is also important to make sure that there's a transparent and trusting relationship between the chair and the CEO. And I encourage both of those individuals to have really honest conversations. How are things going? What would the board like to see differently from the CEO? I think that's a really important relationship, because I have been part of unplanned CEO transitions. And when those two things don't match, it can produce some angst or some hard feelings in that. So I encourage that the CEO and the board of directors have that transparent, which our CEO and our CEOs have had that as well.
Can you say a little bit more about how you might help facilitate the strengthening of that relationship between the lead director and the CEO.
I think it's the lead director as well as the head of the compensation committee. So every year we do CEO benchmarking, for example. It's always our favorite time of the year to talk about CEO pay or executive pay and the importance in working with the compensation committee's consultant in that case and making sure that you have a good understanding. I think the CHRO can play an important role kind of back and forth. One, what is important to the CEO? What is important, whether it be pay or perks or whatever. They have to approve his goals or her goals every single year. So making sure that that relationship and that transparency is there. Sometimes it's about preparing the CEO for a conversation I may know that is coming. And so it still is that conversation between the board and the CEO that's really important, but how can you help bridge some of those discussions and prepare those discussions? And sometimes my chair, tell me what you think Jason's going to think about this. Tell me what you think, how he's going to react to this. So, being transparent and that truth teller to the board, I think is really important, but I do think it helps set the stage of some of those easier conversations. I think we play that role with the CEO and maybe their staff. Now, there are times I think we always need to say to our peers or those direct reports, I think you should go have that conversation. We can't become their crutch. But there are times that I think that I can represent our peers or represent our employee voice. And I think that role is very transferable when we think about the board and the role of the CEO.
Now, as a superstar CHRO, it probably sounds a little easier to go talk to that board members, because one of the questions we get a lot, especially from new CHROs, is, yeah, but how do I go talk to the board if I'm not Ola? So do you have suggestions for new CHROs?
I think it's about creating relationships with your board members. And again, I don't think that, if you're a CHRO and you have candidates that you believe can be CHROs one day, that shouldn't start with the day that they become CHROs. You should give them an opportunity and access to board members to get to know, and that's what I've done as I've thought about my own succession over the years, is making sure that our board of directors has access to our HR talent broadly, not just CHRO candidates, but making sure that you build that relationship and that trust along the way. I think it's getting to know what success looks like. I think every CHRO should really get to know their committee and again, form good relationships with the committee's consultant. That's important as well, as that flows back and forth, because sometimes your consultant can take a message back to that committee versus you in some ways as well. So I think it's about relationship building and building trust, and also making sure that board of directors, that chair or that comp committee chair, or quite frankly the head of risk and audit, know that you have an unbiased view and that you're that voice, that you're that truth teller, even though some things may not be going well. And I think, we share our engagement surveys with our entire board. We talk about what's going well, what we need to improve on. So being transparent about your data, but also about the insights. I think it's important for your board not to just hear from you as CHROs. Our engagement survey is actually communicated by our head of talent. And I'm certainly side by side, but she's got great insights and can answer some of those questions. And so not only do they have confidence in me, but they have confidence in my team. And I think that is a great strategy, to not just be the only face of HR, but how do you introduce that talent throughout your organization as well.
And now you touched on just a moment ago when we were talking about the boards, but what is your role as CHRO in helping develop the executive leadership team more as a team than perhaps as individual contributors?
I think it's both, right? I think we become trusted partners, but also coaches to individuals, and we're an extension of our both our function, but also team dynamics. I think I've witnessed great performing teams and not great performing teams, and I've seen that impact on the company results. And so, as I think, first of all, helping set up the governance of how does your team come together alongside your CEO. So what does that look like from a leadership standpoint? But then what about team effectiveness? So for us, we take Hogan pretty seriously and not only think about Hogan from an individual standpoint, but what is the Hogan profile of this team, and what part do I play versus what part does someone else? I have good recognition, but I have a business leader whose recognition is off the charts. So, that can be the role that person plays. So understanding the team dynamics, understanding your strengths as a leadership team. And I think, again, we can facilitate that so that we can be a high functioning team. We may not always agree with each other, but we walk out of the room kind of supporting each other, and that we come across and that we are a high performing team.
So you've obviously been and are a great CHRO, but what are things that if you look around at CHROs and say, this is what makes a great CHRO, either in the outcomes or the inputs?
Well, I think first and foremost, you have to deliver results, right? You can't, and I don't ever have to wake up and think, are we doing the basics well? I have a great team that does the basics well. And so you have to earn the trust of the business. And I think it goes back to many studies that CES has been part of as well, is what is the role of the CHRO? Everything from being and understanding the business to being a coach, to being that talent strategist, and all of those things. And I think understanding each of those roles and the roles that a CHRO plays. For me, it's about building trust with our shareholders when we have to talk at proxy time, which is about to happen for me, building trust with our board of directors, our CEO, and importantly, your workforce and all of your employees. So for me, it's about that transparency, that vulnerability, that authenticity of telling people, as I always say, I'm going to tell you the truth, but sometimes the truth might change. But being authentic in that and making sure that we're delivering great results, that we are a champion of something that's everyone says, but really a champion attracting, developing, retaining, and engaging that workforce. That is really our responsibility. And again, you can call it workforce strategies, you can call it culture and inclusion, you can call it whatever we want, but every organization is great because of the people that are there. And what is our role in making our people great? Sounds so simple, but it's not. And I think there are many ways that we help develop and make great cultures, but that is why people stay at organizations.
Now, in our CEO succession, at CES, we have our CEO succession planning playbook, and one of those stages is in role development.
That's right.
Can you share a little bit about what that means for you?
It does, and something we share that role development with our board of directors every May. And so I take a couple of pages out of that playbook and kind of show the process to our board of directors, and we have done that for several years. Last year was a pivotal year for us, as not only the organization is growing and changing, and we've done several acquisitions in new markets that are new for us, but it was an opportunity for me to sit down with the CEO and really kind of develop that role profile, not just for today, but also for the future of what are the characteristics. We know that the role of CEO has changed so much over these past 5 years. So developing that CEO profile is so imperative as you think about developing candidates, looking for outside organizations that you may recruit talent from, but also what are the roles or experiences that you need within our organization or outside the organization to get to that pivotal point. We use a process called charting a course. And so that charting a course is where is someone in their career, and is the aspirations, or we believe that they can be CEO, what are those experiences and what are those roles or even jobs that they need to do to get there? And you have to be very thoughtful around that, because you can't just you can't move people too fast, but you can't also let someone sit in a job for 10 years and not have the experiences that they need. And that may mean that you need to create roles along the way. I think CEOs today, business leaders are great business leaders, but they may not be enterprise thinkers and everything. We ask them to think about, their business. They may not understand board governance. They may not understand how to talk to a shareholder, an analyst, and all of that. And so you can't just have a good CFO beside you. You've got to step back and understand how to develop an enterprise strategy, just a business strategy. So I think it's a lot of exposure that we're going to have to think about over the next several years as CHROs, because I don't know that you can move people through their career and get all those experiences. I think you're going to have to think about how do you get some of those experiences and opportunities along the way.
And this role profile, you talked about sitting down with your CEO and developing for what that next CEO might need. How do you then balance that with the board, or helping the board understand and getting their buy-in on what that correct profile is?
Well, I think you start with your CEO, and then obviously you're working with your board and them understanding that as well. And we went and presented that this past year, and they beat it up a little bit, right? And they said, well, we think this is more important than that, and I would add this. So it's a fluid document. It's always going to be ever changing, and as your organization and the outside market changes, I think that you have to think about that. Many years ago, I don't think what we had a thought on activism. I think everybody thinks about activism then, and how do you think about that? So how you develop that, you can't just put it on the shelf and bring it out once a year. You have to kind of review it and understand that of what does that role look like in the future, and understanding that it's going to change on a consistent basis.
And then how do you go about comparing the potential candidates, to that role profile?
That's probably one of the toughest things, right, is to say, and I think also it's very interesting because some CEOs will want to look for candidates that look just like them. And so you really have to go back to that as saying, does this person have this experience? Does this person have this quality? Here are we put a lot of questions out there this year too, of the questions that we wanted to ask ourselves of that. But I do think it's the hard part, and it's again seeing people in those experiences or those situations and how they reacted. Are they a lifelong learner? And looking across their career as well is almost like where they started. I kind of started with my CEO and kind of studied him. He started in a plant as a finance person, so he kind of started in manufacturing, kind of on the warehouse or on the manufacturing floor, and kind of moved his way up. It is about learning agility as well. So it's interesting to kind of study those who have been in the roles and their experiences as you think about where they were successful or not successful. But I do think that's a kind of a living, breathing process that you automatically have to go and not just, again, during succession planning, manage those things, but along the way. And so we have that conversation with our board about leaders, and again, where can we, and what is that next opportunity to develop them?
And then as a last question on this topic, you've had some interesting unplanned CEO succession events. What advice do you give companies, CHROs in particular, and that we should be talking about at CES regarding potential unplanned succession events?
Yeah, I think there's a role that the CHRO plays kind of before, during, and after, and that can be one of the hardest things that I think CHROs will face. We had more of an unplanned CEO succession, and really our CEO was a tremendous leader. I would tell you, foundationally set our culture in place around not just caring for our employees, but caring for our customers. He did some fabulous things. But the organization needed a change, and that board needed a change, and made that decision to make a change. And that is personally hard, but also professionally hard. But again, I step back and use the example is our roles are to do the right thing for the organization, and 50,000 plus employees. So you have to be that truth teller to the board. You have to do everything that they kind of ask you to do, and again, everything from maybe modeling something from a financial standpoint to helping frame a conversation, both with the old CEO, but the new CEO as well. One of the things that I got to talk about with the board was promoting our CFO to CEO, and how did I feel about that, and would I work for that person, and how would the organization feel about that? Also, the transition of making sure that CEO was stepping in and being able to deliver messages of what had to change, but what was going to stay the same, which was a lot about our culture. It was about living up to our values and our mission and our mission and vision. But so you become that truth teller, and you become that person that kind of architects those things together in a way. And I was fortunate to have the experience and know that I helped exit and onboard an organization in a time that the organization has prospered.
And many people might point to how often there's an unplanned succession event and then say, well, see, that's why we don't need to do succession planning. But in your case, did it help to having been working through succession planning for a long time to be ready for that emergency?
Absolutely. I think it goes back to when we looked at our CFO that went into that CEO. I could go right back to that role description, role profile, capabilities, critical experiences, and stack that up with not just what he had done at our organization, but how was he going to stack up against that. He obviously had an interview or conversations with the board around where he would take the organization strategically as well as culturally. But it certainly did, because it gave us a good roadmap, and even though it was unplanned, he was a candidate for CEO, maybe a little bit sooner than what we had necessarily planned. And we had also seen him start to orchestrate many of our turnarounds in some of our businesses, and he's been wildly successful and about to hit his 3-year mark. And it's been a great thing to see how the cultural part of our organization has helped bolster the business results as well.
Ola, as always, thank you very much for being here on campus. I love it personally, and it's great for all of us, so thank you.
Thank you, Anthony.
Thank you for joining this CHRO conversation with Cardinal Health's Ola Snow. Today we unpacked how a global, diverse team can optimize patient care. If you would like to hear more of Ola's thoughts, I recommend checking out J.P. Elliott's Future of HR podcast, number 39, for his interview with Ola. On behalf of the University of South Carolina's Master of Human Resources program and the Center for Executive Succession, thank you for joining us.